chose to birth her first baby in a birthing center with medical midwives. Her prenatal visits were pretty run-of-the-mill for that type of pregnancy surveying, and Abby ended up having quite a straightforward birth. Things didn't get messy until right after the birth of her daughter, where she immediately went floppy. The medical midwives assessed Abby's baby and called for EMS to take the child to the nearest NICU. Abby was left alone at the birthing center with only her mother and doula to tend to her, while her husband left to the hospital with the baby. During the 2 weeks of Abby's daughter being in the NICU, Abby underwent a D&C to remove a piece of placenta. She wasn't able to hold her daughter for the first 5 days of life and was obviously unprepared for something like this to happen, which led her to having a severe bout of postpartum depression once she was able to bring her daughter home. Abby chose to have her second and third births within the hospital, where she was diagnosed with gestational diabetes. These births were again pretty okay, but not exactly what she was looking for. Feeling there was one last baby that was wanting to come through, Abby was committed to listening to her intuition and truly having this birth in the way she wanted. She got connected with some women via Facebook groups about birthing free of the medical system, and that was the spark she needed to make the choice for having the birth that she always wanted. Hello, Abby, and welcome to the Free Birthing in Color movement. I am very excited to have you on. We have a mutual friend that gave you the information for you to be here, and you've got a lot of beautiful birth stories to share with us.
Yes, I do. And I'm very, very excited to be here. Birth is one of those things that, as you'll hear, I'm a mom of four, so I have four unique birth stories, all leading up to my very recent one. And so I'm very excited to kind of dive into all of that. And more than anything, so that other women can hear what birth could look like, and having that support, knowing that we're not alone in this and that we all can have very different birth experiences and that we can honor them all and learn from them all. So yeah, I'm excited.
Absolutely. It's that like that beautiful growth experience with each birth. You learn a little bit more about yourself, and then it takes you to the journey with your last birth, which you took your total power back and did it. And oh, I'm so excited for that one. But before we get into all of that, I would love to ask you, what is your ancestry and lineage that you're passing on to your children?
Yeah, so my parents are from El Salvador, so Central America. I know that our lineage definitely runs deep with a lot of powerful women, but also a lot of trauma. There, I am the cycle breaker in my family, which is a whole other story in itself. I am passing along to them, to my children, the lineage, the strength that comes, the resiliency, the power from our ancestry, which is, predominantly Latino. My husband's Portuguese, and so they'll also have some of that lineage as well. And I feel very strongly about them knowing both the good and the bad, right? Because we can, the only way that we can fix anything is by acknowledging first. And I definitely want them to acknowledge everything that I went through and everything that the women before me went through, which I'll tell a little bit about that during my fourth birth, how that came all into combination, which is very powerful. But yeah, that's basically what I'm passing down.
Oh, I love that. And I love how you say you're the cycle breaker, because you are. You've done really amazing things for yourself, for your past generations, and for your future generations. So yeah, let me ask you this then. Where does your motherhood journey begin?
I truly believe it began for me when I found out I was pregnant. Um, it's interesting because growing up, like I touched on, I did grow up in a very traumatic kind of childhood. And I didn't really get to experience childhood myself. And so I wasn't one of those little girls that dreamed of being a mother one day, of having children. That didn't really happen until I became a mother, where I was like, oh, this is happening now. So I feel like once I saw that positive test, I was really, I became a mother that day. So
Okay. Wow. And then how did that go for you? This first birth experience, was it I'm assuming I kind of know a little bit of the information that you gave me before the call. Um, yeah, like what was that like? Did you just take the test and then book in with a doctor or set up the appointments? Like, how did that all go for you?
Yeah, so my partner and I at the time had been together for 10 years.
Okay.
So waited quite a long time to have children. Like I said, it wasn't one of those things that I was like super dreaming of, that I was like looking forward to. But I was open to it because obviously it's an important conversation to have with your partner before you get married. And I remember we had that discussion, like, do we want a family? And I said, yes, I'm open to it, but it wasn't anything that I was rushing towards or anything like that. And so we did have a beautiful 10 years together where there was we went through a lot together, him and I personally, that's when I entered into recovery. So I was already 5 years into my recovery journey when I became a mom.
Mm.
And and it was just like, it was one of those things where like on our first anniversary, I
Mm.
remember, like I can remember it clear as day. We were sitting in our bedroom, we were on our bed. It was like a sunny day because our anniversary is in August. And
Mm.
he's like, so what do you think? Should we start trying? And I was like, no. I like shut it down right away. I was like, no, I'm not ready. And
Mm.
like, we had a real good soul to soul kind of conversation at the time. And I'm
Mm.
glad that, he was very respectful of, it just wasn't my time at the time for me to even think of it. And so
Mm.
it wasn't until 5 years later that we finally made the decision where I had felt I had done a really good chunk of healing.
Okay.
I had gotten through a lot of things personally, that I was in a space where, and I think that you'll agree, we're never truly ready to become mothers.
Mm.
But there is a time when when it, like for me, I was like, okay, I was open to it,
Mm.
and so, yeah, so I had been on birth control for years, like probably, I want to say like 15 years by that time. And
Okay.
so the first thing was I came off birth control, and then we started trying, and it did take us a little bit of time. I think it was about 6 months
Mm.
of us trying. And of course, those 6 months are just grueling, because,
Mm.
every single month when you get your period, you're like, oh, like there's that disappointment, that, kind of sadness.
Mm.
And because once I was in the mind frame of it, I was like, okay, let's do this,
Yeah.
and so so we did try for about 6 months, and then yeah, I'll never forget, it was December, and we were getting ready to go to a Christmas party or a New Year's party, and I was late, and I had been late a few times. I had those false alarms where like my
Mm.
period was like 1 or 2 weeks late, and I was like, oh my gosh, is this the time? And then it was a negative test, and then I got my period like the next day, type of thing,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So I just had this feeling. I had this feeling. So I went to the pharmacy, I grabbed a test. I didn't even tell him. And then I went to the bathroom, I checked, and then while I was getting ready, I just had it there. And then we were ready to get out the door, and I went back into the bathroom, and I saw the test, and it was positive. And I was
Mm.
just like, like it was just like those life-changing kind of moments, right? Where I was like, wow, this is real. And then
Mm.
Nelson, because my husband's name is Nelson, and he was like, what? And then it was like I showed him, and then we both got emotional. Like
Aw.
he always wanted to be a father.
Mm.
It was for sure one of the big things that he was dreaming of. And of course, by that time, 10 years into our relationship, there was a lot of questions from family, well-meaning family, like, what's going on? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I hate that people ask those kind of things because you don't know what's going on in the background, right?
Exactly.
Like, so is everything okay? Like all those kind of things, getting into his head about it and stuff, right? And I was just, like not even concerned about all of that. But yeah, the day came, we found out we were pregnant, and I was so excited. It was one of those things that once I was in it, I was in it.
Yeah.
And I was very naive. I had no idea about the birth world. I just knew what most people know, which is what you see on TV,
Mm-hmm.
like the depiction that you see in movies and in shows. I had never really done any sort of research or anything like that. I just knew that, you get pregnant, you have a doctor, you have your baby at the hospital, and end of story, basically.
Mm.
And I don't remember who it was, like, because I honestly wish I did, but somebody had shared with me the documentary, The Business of Being Born,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
with Ricky Lake.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched the documentary, and it changed my life. Like it went from me being like completely uninformed about birth to then like watching this and just resonating so deeply with the message around the documentary, right? Which is that, you
Mhm.
know, in on today's modern society, especially in North America, birth is very medicalized, right? From the
Mhm.
time you get pregnant to the time that, you know, you have your baby, it's this event, right? This medicalized event. And
Mhm.
I very much resonated with that. And so I told my husband, we like watched it together. We both were on board. And I was like, okay, well, I want some choices. I once again, I had no idea where to turn to, who to turn to, but I just knew that I resonated with this. So I was like, you know what, like I knew that we lived in a small kind of condo, and so I knew that having like a home birth wasn't necessarily going to be ideal for our setting, but I
Okay.
did look around, and then we found a birth center. So I was like, okay, that's kind of the second best thing. So that was
Mhm.
the first step I took, and then I found a doula,
Mm.
and she was incredible. I call her my fairy godmother because like
Mm.
she came in and she was like really at the end of her career. She was you know, like older. She had a ton of experiences,
Mm.
and she came and sat with us for like a few hours on our first kind of intake session,
Mhm.
and just started to kind of share with us the choices, the options. And she said something to me in our first sit down that stayed with me for the rest of my life, and it still
Mm.
does. And she said, you have to know all your choices and options, because if you don't have any. And I just remember,
Yes.
yeah, it really hit me, because it was like, oh, you know, and now more than ever, 4 births later, I know how true that statement is, right?
Mhm.
I have no idea. Then you just kind of succumb to everything that comes your way, and you think that it's just protocol, right? Like
Yep.
you have no, you have a choice, right? And so
Mhm.
that was very impactful for me. And you know, when she just kind of shared like her wisdom and all that kind of stuff. And so I had a very amazing first pregnancy. I was 33, so I was a little bit older,
Mm.
but I was healthy. I felt great. I had the cute little baby belly. I wore high heels pretty much till the end of my pregnancy. You know, I didn't have any morning sickness or anything like that. We had a beautiful gender reveal. We found out we were having a baby girl, which I was
Oh.
very surprised. I thought it was a boy from the beginning, but she
Mm.
surprised me. You know, and then so we were going to do the birth center birth. I got a midwife. And yeah, just kind of went down that route. I thought that I was having an empowered type of birth. I was having some choices in there and all that kind of stuff. You know, but from the beginning with my midwife, you
Mm.
know, like now that I've had the time to really reflect on my experiences and everything, uh, I do realize that there was a little bit of a disconnect there, you know,
Okay.
where I didn't feel totally connected to her. She was
Mm.
nice, you know, she was very she was pleasant, she was nice, but there wasn't really this deep connection with her for sure, as like somebody who's going to be involved in such an intimate process,
Mm.
right? But I just kind of ignored my intuition about it and just kind of went along with it. And so I was due on September the 13th, and at the stroke of midnight of September the 13th, I went into labor. So
Mm.
um, I I remember I woke up, or that day, early that day, first thing in the morning.
Sorry, can I just stop you before you go into that? What were your prenatal visits like when you were seeing this woman? Because you're saying that there wasn't that connection there. So was it something that you were noticing in these prenatal visits, but still just kind of like, oh, pushing it down, just being like, oh, it doesn't matter?
They were very surface. That's all I
Mm.
can say. Like they were very regimented, very surface. Like it was almost like
Mm.
a checklist. You know, you
Okay.
go there and it's like you do the measurements. You know, she gives me a requisition for like ultrasound or whatever.
Mm.
You know, and it just like, and when you don't know any, when I had, because I had no reference point, I had no idea like that this, you know, that birth is sacred and like all these
Yeah.
like amazing things, right? I just knew within that I felt like, is this it? Like it kind of felt flat to me, you know, where I
Okay.
went into sessions and I didn't know. And then she'd be like, do you have any questions? And I'd be like, no, because I didn't know what to ask, right? I was just
Yeah.
more so like, okay, like everything's measuring okay, like, you know. And then when we got closer to the end of the pregnancy and she started asking, like, so you're getting close, like what's your birth plan? Like, what are you wanting? And I just said, well, I want to make sure that I want to labor in the water. And then when she comes out, I want to be able to breastfeed her right away. Like I had this like picture, and I kind of laugh about it now,
Mm.
because like I envisioned like, you know, having this beautiful birth center birth, in the water, and then the golden hour with like my baby on my chest and like the wind blowing in my hair and like just all picture perfect, and I knew I didn't want drugs, so that was
Yeah.
also a big thing for me too, because it being in recovery, my line of thinking was that I spent 15 years numbing everything in my life. I did not want to numb this one experience that was
Yeah.
going to be so powerful in my life, right? And so I knew that I wasn't going to have an epidural
Mm.
and things like that, and so she knew that obviously having a birth center birth is not even an option, right?
Mm.
But yeah, there was just wasn't any like depth to our relationship, right? And I at the time I didn't know this, but now I do, because obviously I've now had 4 babies and I've had very different experiences. And so like they say, hindsight is 2020,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in hindsight, there was a very surface and just kind of this like this disconnect. That is
Okay.
the best way that I can explain it. So
Yeah.
um so the day comes, I wake up, and when I got out of bed, I felt a little bit of leaking. And so I was like, okay, that's weird. Maybe it's pee, but then I went to the bathroom, and then I was like, okay, that was weird. Like, so I messaged her and I was like, oh, I just got out of bed and there was some leaking. And then she's like, oh, maybe it's a little bit of your water breaking. And she's like, let's just like, and I remember her telling me this. She's like, make sure you get some rest today as much as you can, like, eat something and then keep me posted. And I was like,
Mm.
okay. So I went about my day and nothing really like happened like during the day. We had a meeting that evening with some friends. Like I said, I was wearing high heels. I went there, and then during our that evening, I started to kind of feel something different, right? Like and kind of like period kind of pains, like a little bit crampy. And I was like, okay, just kind of mindful of it, and went home, took a shower, got into my pajamas, and then I tried to go to sleep. And then something was like I felt some shifts happening, like there was something obviously happening. And then suddenly I knew, like it was like something I knew. I was like, okay, I'm in labor. So I woke up
Mm.
my husband, and he's like, oh, really? And we were just both like. And so for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to go downstairs and fold some laundry. So
Yeah.
here I am in early labor at the time. Contractions were about 10 minutes apart or so, because I was timing them. They're
Mm.
about 10, 12 minutes apart, lasting maybe about 30 seconds or so, 30 seconds to a minute or so. But I was able to still, fold and all that kind of stuff. And we were just kind of talking with each other, and no idea what was gonna, kind of transpire. And I remember I told him, I was like, okay, so can you go and change our bed covers? He's like, right now? And I was like, yes, right now. I'm like, I don't want to, like, I want to come clean sheets. And then he's like, okay. So we went to go change the bed covers, and then things started kind of picking up more around 3 or 4 in the morning. So I messaged my doula,
Mm.
and then she's like, do you want me to come over? And I was like, yes. And then so she came over around 5 in the morning. She got there, and like I said, slowly but steady, things were starting to pick up. And then around 7, I called my midwife, and I told
Mm.
her that, oh, I lost my mucus plug in between here.
Okay.
So I went to the bathroom. I saw this like big glob of like kind of bloody mucus come out, and I showed my doula, and she
Mm.
came in. She's like, "Oh, that's your mucus plug." She's like, "It's happening. Like things are happening." She's like, "I think it's a good idea for you to call your midwife." And so, oh, let me go back to my last visit with my midwife. So
Okay.
on my last visit with her, she told me, she was like, okay, so your due date is next week. She's like, it's on Thursday. She's like, and in all my years, and Thursdays are my clinic days. She's like, in all of my years practicing, I've never had one of my clients go into labor on my clinic days or whatever. So she's just kind of laughing about it.
Mm.
And then sure enough, I went into labor on my due date, and it was her clinic day. So when I called her, she was like, oh, she's like, okay. She's like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I think I want to head to the birth center soon. And she's like, okay, so what time do you want to get there at? And I was like, at this time it was 7 in the morning.
Mm.
So I was like, probably like in a couple of hours or so. And she's like, okay. She's like, I need to figure out what I'm gonna do about my clinic, because obviously it's my clinic day today. I need to find some coverage for like my clients and blah blah blah. And she's like, so I'll get there when I'll try to get there as soon as I can. She's like,
Mm.
but I'm not sure what time. And so I was like, she's like, so if you want to make your way there, then you can make your way there, and then just let me know and I'll meet you there. So then I called my mom, and for whatever reason, talking to my mom, as soon as she picked up the phone, I started crying. I was like, Mom,
Aw.
I'm in labor. And she was like, oh, she's like, okay, do you want me to come? And I was like, yes, I want you to come. And so
Mm.
she came over, and then things were really picking up at this point. So around 9:30, around 10 in the morning, we started to make our way to the birth center. And
Okay.
on the way there, I was having like strong contractions. Like there was like, I just remember it was a blur. Like we were all
Mm.
like, I was in the front passenger seat with my husband. Every bump, every was like really like
Mm-hmm.
agitating for me. Then we get there, and then I strip everything. I strip out all my clothes. I'm just wearing like my sports bra and like underwear. And I'm just like, I go straight into the water because like for whatever reason, I just was feeling called to go into the water. And so I did a lot of my laboring in the water. And I remember my water actually broke in the water.
Okay.
And then it just became uncomfortable being in the water. So I got out, and then I started to kind of, oh, and so she got there around, I want to say around noon-ish. So I had already been there for a couple of hours with my doula, and I was just kind of laboring in the water with my husband. And then she came in, and then she checked me, and she was like, okay, you're about like 6, 7 centimeters dilated right now. So you still have some ways to go.
Mm.
And I was like, okay. And so I got out of the water, and then I was just pacing. I was like pacing
Mm.
back and forth in the room. I went into the shower. My doula was like, you should try the shower. I went in the shower. And then I started doing this like pacing, shower, toilet,
Mm.
pacing, shower, toilet kind of pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just like, labor was just like full on at this point. And then it got to the point around, I want to say around 3 or 4 where I started just feeling really exhausted because by this point
Mm.
I had been awake for over 24 hours, and the last
Mm-hmm.
time I had eaten anything was the day before supper time. So like I
Okay.
had already gone almost 24 hours without eating and without sleeping. And then I
Mm.
just getting really tired. And the last thing I wanted from all my research that I had done up until that point was to lay on my back. I just did not want to birth that way, but I got to the point where I was just exhausted. So I went to the bed, and then I just laid on my back, and
Mm.
I was laboring. And then came the urge to push. So then
Mm.
it was like suddenly I felt the urge to push, and I started like pushing. They checked me. I was already 10 centimeters. And so I started pushing, and that's when problems started happening. So basically I went into the pushing stage, and probably around 4 hours of pushing, and I could not get
Wow.
her out. I could not get her out. I was trying, I was doing everything I could. I was roaring, I was just like, I just didn't know what to do. And I remember screaming at my midwife, and I was like, get her out, like, help me get her out. And she's like, she's right there. We can see her head. And I could feel her head. Like
Mm.
I would like feel down there, and I could feel her hair. And
Mm.
then she back in, so it was like this thing of like going out, going in, going out, going in. And then I was
And
like,
were you pushing on your back the whole time, or were you switching
yes,
positions? Oh, you were on. Okay.
back, just on my back, and I was just exhausted by this point. And so came to the point where I was starting to feel really scared and defeated because I was like, like I knew it'd been a long time. And my midwife wasn't really giving me any sort of guidance. Like she was just
Mm.
like, keep going, you got this, and like, and all that stuff, but like
Mm-hmm.
wasn't suggesting any sort of like, why don't you try this, like gravity, or why don't you try like this? Like it was just more like, she's almost here, she's almost here. And like, and so eventually I just remember laying there, and I had barely any strength left. And I
Mm.
just closing my eyes and just like summoning all of the powers of the universe. And I was like, okay, I'm good with this next contraction. I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to give it my all. And then the contraction came, and then I pushed with all my might, and she came out finally, finally. So this was, like I said, I want to say about 4 hours of active pushing. She
Wow.
came out, and it was one of those moments in my life that was both the most joyful, followed by the most terrifying. So as soon as she came out, I was like weeping, and my husband was weeping, and my mom was there, and we were all crying.
Mm.
And I looked at her, I opened my eyes, and I looked at her, and she's like big, beautiful brown eyes, lots of dark hair. And she
Mm.
comes out, and she's looking around. But then something was off, because as soon as she was kind of looking around, they were like stimulating her back.
Mm-hmm.
And she just like suddenly went floppy. Like she
Mm.
just like flopped over, and she was
Yeah.
blue. She was blue. And so like I looked at her, and like when she was flopping over and she was like blue, suddenly I saw the panic of the two midwives, because then like her helper came like halfway through my labor. And so I saw the panic in them, and then they quickly cut her cord. And at this point, I hadn't even held her. Like she had just come out. They pulled
Mm,
her up, like, kind of sitting, and they were like stimulating her. And then when they saw that she wasn't really responding, and then she started kind of flopping over, they cut the cord, and then they took her onto a table that was in the room, and they started like
mm,
doing CPR on her. And
mm,
I'm just laying there in this like this state, like it was almost like a dream-like kind of state, but
mm.
also like it was just a weird mind frame because I was also bleeding. I was hemorrhaging at the time. And so
Okay.
there was a lot going on. Like they were working on her, and then the other midwife was beside me, and they started like giving me the Pitocin injections to stop the bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then afterwards she comes, the helper, and she was like, we need to get your placenta out. And so then they start coming doing to do the fundal massage.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm just like, so like I said, there was just a lot going on. And then and they were like, we're gonna have to call the paramedics because she's not responding. And so they called the paramedics, and then within about 3 minutes, like it
Mm.
was literally like minutes, um, all the fire department came, the EMS came, and they all came into the room. I remember there was like at one point like 12 first responders in the room. And
Whoa.
and then they came in, and then the captain or whoever he was came up to the bed, and he looks at me and he was like, "Are you the mom?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm the mom, like clearly."
Obviously.
He's like, we're gonna take her to your the children's the NICU, that's the Stollery, which is our local NICU here.
Mm.
And your husband's welcome to follow us, and you can come and meet us there. You're like, they didn't allow him in the ambulance for whatever reason.
Aw.
And so my husband was like, okay, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna follow them. And here I am laying there. And I was just so naive and oblivious to the whole situation that in my mind, I was like, okay, they're gonna take her to the hospital, they're gonna help her breathe. Everything's gonna be fine. Like I was just very much like,
Mm.
didn't even think that this was gonna turn into some like big deal, right? I was
Right.
just we're just gonna help her a little bit with some oxygen.
Yeah.
And so my husband left, followed the ambulance, and then the midwives were there for maybe a little bit longer, until like my hemorrhaging kind of stopped, and then they basically left. So they left, and then I was left there with my doula, my mom, and then my sisters. And it took me 2 hours to be able to get up off the bed because I was so weak. Like I was so weak. Every time that I would sit up, I would get like hypotensive. So like
Mm.
the ringing in the ears, the cold sweats, like I was about to pass out from the blood
Mm.
loss, right? And so I would lay back down, and I was like, okay, I'm not ready to get up. So eventually I was like, I need to go and see my baby. And I need to like, like I got this urge where I was like, okay, I need to get up. I need to like force myself to like, find the strength. And so my mom came on
May I
one
ask
go.
quickly, was there a reason why both of the midwives left? Like, why didn't one go and one stay with you just to make sure that something else didn't happen to you while they were gone?
I have no idea, to
That's
be honest.
crazy.
Crazy. Yeah, they just
Wow.
pretty much up and left. And she was like, I got some paperwork to do back in the office. Give me a call if and let me know what's going on with the baby, basically. Like, yeah,
That's awful.
it was crazy, like really
Oh.
crazy. So my mom goes on one side and my doula goes on the other side, and then I'm hanging on both ends, and they get me off the bed, and then a gush of blood just comes out.
Mm.
I had to sit back down for a little bit, give myself a minute, and then eventually like they get me back up, and then I go to the bathroom, I rinse myself off, I put on my like clothes, and
Mm.
basically they take me to my sister's car, and I was like, we have to go to the hospital. And I went into like fetal position in my sister's passenger car. She like put her passenger side seat like almost like a bed, and I
Mm.
was just laying there because I was just like, I was weak,
Oh,
I was
yeah.
exhausted. And then we get to the hospital. My sister grabs a wheelchair from the front. We get wheeled up until the NICU. And here's where everything just turns into like a nightmare, basically. So
Mm.
I wheeled up into the NICU, and I go in, and the doctor comes up to me right away, and he was like, are you Esperanza's mom? And I looked at him, and it was like this shock because we had decided her name beforehand. We knew her name was going to be Esperanza,
Mm.
but like it wasn't like, it just took me aback because first of all, I hadn't even held my baby by this point. I had just
Yeah.
birthed her. I hadn't held her. I hadn't told anyone that that was her name. My husband obviously got there, and so he told them.
Mm.
So it's like this really weird moment where somebody was naming my baby who I had like hadn't even held,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, yeah, that's my baby. And they're like, okay, we need to talk to you. And I was like, okay, so can I see her first? And they're like, oh yeah, yeah. So they take me to the main NICU area, and I see her, and she's like full of tubes, like tubes. She
Oh.
was intubated. They had her on like all sorts of tubes. Like I have pictures, and it's really scary. And I
Mm.
look, like, oh my God. And then so they were like, okay, so we need to talk to you. And so I go into a room, and the head doctor and one of the nurses comes in, and they start basically explaining to us that she was born with a condition called HIE. So basically it's like a lack of oxygen to the brain.
Mm.
And typically babies born with this condition do end up with cerebral palsy. And then they start basically giving me all of for an hour, basically all the worst case scenario of what could happen.
Oh my
And I know that they
gosh.
obviously have to do that to prepare you, right? But I'm like
But they
sitting
could
there.
have waited an hour. Like instead of talking for the hour, they could have been like, hang out with your babe, like we'll come
Yeah.
back. Oh
Yeah.
gosh.
But the
That's
thing is that they put her in, so how they treat HIE is that they put babies in a cold coma. So
oh
basically it's called cooling treatment.
yeah.
And that basically helps for the brain to like the swelling to go down, for the brain to kind of have a break, so that there's
Mm.
no further damage from like the
Mm.
oxygen and all that stuff. And you can't even touch your baby. So I couldn't
Oh.
even touch her. I could look at her, but I wasn't able to touch her. It was so traumatic, like.
Mm-hmm.
And so she ended up, long story short, she ended up in the NICU for 2 weeks. She's a miracle baby. She was in the cooling treatment for 5 days. We couldn't touch her during that time, which was like horrific to like go and see her. And I would cry every time because I just wanted to hold
Yeah.
my baby. She was intubated. So she had this thing called silent cries where like she would cry, but you couldn't hear anything. It was like devastating, like just to see her that way. And
Oh.
yeah, it was nothing prepares you for the NICU experience, and going home that first night empty hand, so like we go home and I walk by her nursery, and like I have no baby to put in this nursery, right? And both my husband broke down, both him and I broke down. It was just one of those life altering experiences for both of us. And it was just, I was not prepared, right? And never mind me taking care of my own body, like everything that I had just gone through, my focus completely went to her
Mm.
and there for her. And so, we got home that night, slept. As soon as we woke up, we went straight to the NICU, and pretty much that cycle went on where it was like home, sleep, wake up, go be with her. We had a ton of outpouring of support with our family members who would come and be with her and all that when we couldn't be there, all that kind of stuff. Like a lot of,
Mm.
I'm very grateful for the support that we did end up having from our friends and family during that time, meal,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. But around so this was on a Friday. The first day at the NICU was a Friday. And around Tuesday-ish, I just realized, like, I started to pay attention to my body, and I was like, okay, like I'm having a lot of pain, like a lot
Mm.
of pain, and I was passing like massive, massive clots of blood. And
Mm.
I know that a little bit of passing is normal.
Yeah.
But I like the last one I was was at the hospital, went to the bathroom, and then all of a sudden I see this like golf ball size, like actually more like a plum size clot in
Yeah.
the toilet. And so I take a picture of it, and then I sent it to my midwife, and I was like, hey, like I just passed this. Like, is this normal? And she's like, how many of those have you been passing? I'm like, pretty frequently, like quite a bit, but this is the biggest one. She's like, okay, I'm gonna come and see you at the
Mm-hmm.
hospital. You're gonna be there. And I was like, okay. So she came.
Mm.
The weird thing is that so she comes, she does my vitals and all that kind of stuff, and then she gives me like a requisition to go get an ultrasound done and blood work done at the same time.
Yeah.
And she came in, she saw the baby because I was like, oh, do you want to come and see her? So she came. There was no sort of debrief around what happened at the birth. Like she didn't sit with me and was like, like to process any of like what happened. Like it was just more like she came, she saw the baby, and she's like, I'm so sorry that like, that happened. And that was pretty much it. Like there wasn't any,
Really?
no, like there was no debrief, like, oh, like, so this is what happened, like all this stuff. Like it was so weird. It was almost like, and then what that did for me was that it almost brought me into this like shame response that I was
Mm.
like something I did was wrong, you know, like, or like all that self-blame, all of that kind of stuff, right? So anyway, so I go and get the ultrasound done, and then an hour later she calls me and she was like, you have retained placenta, so like there's a piece of placenta still stuck in your uterus, and that's why it's causing all that, like the clots and like the pain and all that kind of stuff. And
Mm.
so she gave me a choice to either go on medication. She said, we can get you on some medication that will help contract so that you can possibly pass that piece.
Mm.
She's like, or you can go in for a DNC. And I was like, I'll go in for the DNC, because I was just like, I didn't want to, like, she's like, sometimes the medication doesn't work.
Right.
So I was like, yeah, I'll just go in for the DNC. So they booked me in. I went in the next day, had the DNC. And then when I came out, the nurses came and they were like, oh, do you want something for pain? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I was in quite a bit of pain. And they're like, okay, so if we can give you some morphine or whatever, but you have to stay here 24 hours for observation. I was like, no, that's okay. I'm like, I'll just take some Tylenol and Advil. I'm like, I have my baby that's in the NICU and she woke up with a fever today, so I need to be there. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
like you're gonna have to sign this waiver that you're leaving against medical advice and all that kind of
Mm.
stuff. Like, yep, I'll sign the waiver. So here I was, like, you know, basically like hobbling out of the hospital after having a DNC, you know, checking myself out and going straight to the NICU to be with her. And so I popped
Oh.
some Advil and was just there for her, right? While I was like completely ignoring my body and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so she was there for the 2 weeks. She did incredibly. We were able to hear her cry for the first time at 5 days when they extubated her, which
Mm.
was a monumental moment that time stood still. Like they
Mm.
took out her tubes, we are all like quietly waiting, anxiously
Oh.
waiting, and then she let out her first cry, which was like
Oh.
crazy. You know, at 5 days old, the first time I held her, she was full of wires. um oh my goodness, like that experience in itself. I remember holding her and like I had no idea that this stuff happens, but my boobs were like leaking, like I was like covered in milk, like when I was holding her. And
Yeah.
like you have to like hold her firmly, she's gonna try to nuzzle in on you because she's gonna smell you, you're her mom. And you can't, because she had like she had the tube in her throat, right? And so I wanted to like nuzzle her and like hold her,
Oh.
and like I couldn't. They were like, no, you have to hold her firm or else, like, you know. And I get it, right? Like obviously she had all this medical devices and stuff, right? But like
Mm.
my primal
Mm-hmm. Your
reaction
instinct.
instincts was like, you know, here's my body like freaking like flooding me with like all this emotion and like hormones and all that kind of stuff, and I'm being told, you know, to do something else, right? Like
Mm.
to kind of be careful with her and all that kind of stuff, right? And so it was like this crazy experience. And so she comes home, she passed all of her tests with flying colors. She's truly a miracle. You know, the neuro team came to see us and they're like, you know, usually because they did an MRI and all of that kind of stuff, she didn't have any sort of um she didn't have any what do you call it, like side effects, like in terms of like they usually have seizures when they go on this kind of cold coma and all that kind of stuff. She didn't have any of that. And then her brain scans came back normal, and so they were like, yeah, we'll only be able to truly know if there was, you know, any sort of like long standing damages when she's older and she's not hitting milestones and all that kind of stuff. And so
Mm.
so when she was discharged, she came home to us at 2 weeks old. And pretty much then we just went on with our lives, basically, right? And so I unfortunately ended up having severe postpartum depression
Yeah.
you know, from that experience. And I went into full on isolation for the first 3 months where, you know, yeah, and it's interesting how our society kind of does things like this, where like during the time we had an outpouring of like support and like meals and all that kind of stuff. And then once she was home, that support slowly started to kind of dwindle. And then it was
Okay.
just more our core people, like our moms and all that
Mm.
kind of stuff, right? And to be honest, no one really no one really asked me like, are you okay? You know,
Mm.
like, are you okay? Right? It was just more for me, like that translated to like, it's expected that I'm okay. You know,
Yeah.
like I need to like, here's my baby home. And then all those other narratives start coming into play where it's like, I should be happy that she's home with me. I should be like thankful that like, you know, she didn't have any side effects. All these I
Mm-hmm.
should, it, like
Mm-hmm.
invalidating my very real experience, right?
Yeah. And that's a very traumatic experience. Everything that happened
Absolutely.
to you from, you know, the pushing to the emergence to her flopping over, you not holding her, to bleeding excessively, and then just
Yeah.
being left at this birth center with only your mom and your sisters there. Like, grateful that they were there, but if something worse happened, like, they don't know
Yeah,
what to do. And then,
exactly.
yeah, not being able to hold your own baby for two, was it two? No, it was five, for the first 5 days.
5 days. Yeah.
Yeah, like, that's just, oh gosh,
Yeah.
that's like, just
Yeah.
hearing that just breaks my heart. And oh my goodness, that's,
Yeah.
no mother should have to go through that. I mean, that, and like you said, you can't prepare for something like that because,
No,
oh,
no one prepares you for any of that kind of stuff. And it was just everything was shattered. All the hopes that
mm,
I had. And mind you, I didn't share the part about when we decided to have a midwife and we decided to
mm,
have a birth center birth,
mm,
how our family was very opposed to it. They were
okay,
like, why would you do that? This is why doctors like exist. Like,
yeah,
we live in Canada. We're not for a third world country. Like all these kind of like because we're so conditioned in our society that birth is a medical event, right?
mm-hmm,
How dare me think outside the box? You know what I mean?
exactly,
Then of course the worst that could happen happens, and so there was this like this deep "I told you so," right? Where it
oh
was
god, ugh,
for me that I was like, oh my God, like they were right. Who was I thinking that I could have this beautiful birth and, and that I could have all these things. And like, I ended up having none. And instead I ended
mm,
up with birth trauma. Right.
oh,
So it was just one of those really soul crushing experiences and led me
yeah,
into my journey of having postpartum depression, isolating, and then thankful that my husband is who he is and knows me inside out, and he started to notice that I was
mm,
very much isolating, and he kind of had a little intervention with me and was like, like you're not being yourself, you're
mm,
isolating, you're not reaching out to your supports and all that kind of stuff. And so I ended up getting help for the postpartum depression, and that led me down a journey to becoming certified as a peer facilitator for parents who experience perinatal mood disorders like myself, because I
mm,
recognize that there's so much need for it and there's very little resources,
yeah,
right? And because it took me a long time to find the resources to get the help that I needed to come out of that, right? And more so anything, it's like having platforms like this, like your platform, right, to be able to speak about these things so
mm,
that others can be aware,
yeah,
right, that these things can happen and like this is what it could look like and all that kind of stuff, right? Because these kind of things don't get talked about enough, nearly enough, right? And so that
no,
a lot of isolation and shame, right? Especially
oh,
to the mother.
wow. And can I ask, were you able to breastfeed your daughter at
No.
all? No. Oh.
So unfortunately, I was not able to breastfeed her, which was a whole other thing. In the
Mm,
thing that I was grateful for there is that the nurses were amazing. Like they were incredible in the NICU, and they showed me how to pump. I had no idea pumping was even a thing. I
mm,
hadn't like didn't know anything about that. And here I was in the NICU, and they had a specific room that was designated for pumping. So they had all the supplies in there, they had the pumps, all that kind of stuff. And obviously, like my milk came in fast and furious, within a few days. And so they taught me how to pump. And unfortunately, like most NICU babies,
mm,
she just never latched. She never latched.
mm,
I saw multiple, I think I saw about 3 lactation consultants, and I
mm,
could not get her to latch. It was actually very traumatic for me because here it
yeah.
was. I brought her home, and then I remember my doula, who's also a lactation consultant, came to be with me, and we tried and we tried, and she would scream and cry and just get frustrated. And then I would start screaming and
Oh,
crying. Like I was just like, I felt so helpless. And I'm like, I'm just trying to bond with you,
yeah. Oh, that's so
I didn't want to.
sad.
So
Yeah.
I exclusively pumped with her for a year. So that was like,
Mm,
and I got through that time because I found a massive support group on Facebook. It was like for exclusively pumping moms. And I entered that world, right?
okay,
Where like
yeah,
I was like, whoa, it's a whole world, And so yeah, so unfortunately she never latched, but I was able to feed her with my milk for a year.
yeah.
I exclusively pumped with her. She never took a bottle either. So once we were done our oh sorry, she never that was my son. I'm thinking about my second son. So
Mhm.
he was just bottle fed and while I was
Yeah.
exclusively pumping with her. And now she's 5 years old. She's thriving. She's in kindergarten. She's my little warrior. She's
Wow.
amazing. And so needless to say, that birth experience very much put me at a place where once we decided to get pregnant again,
Yeah.
so I got pregnant pretty quickly. My first three babies are about 17 months apart each.
Okay.
So they were pretty much back to back.
Mm-hmm.
I went the hospital route with the second one, right? Where I was
Okay.
like, okay, forget, thinking outside the box, like I was terrified, right, of all
Yeah.
this happening again. And so went the hospital route. I ended up being super blessed with an incredible OB, very, very well known in the birthing industry here. In the birthing field here in my hometown. Just a very gentle man, very yeah, just like I'm very trusting and all that kind of stuff. So I had a really amazing experience with him and with my son. That was my first son that was born in the hospital. I thought that this was my redemptive birth. So,
Okay.
like I had him in the hospital. I had a birth photographer there. I had my doula there. My mom was there again. And I didn't do the epidural again, all of that kind of stuff. And when he came out and I heard him cry for the first time, holy smokes, what a healing moment that was for me. Like we have pictures of it, and like we were all emotional. My husband was
Mm.
emotional. It was something so simple as hearing your baby cry when they come out that is taken
Yeah.
so for granted when you're a birth trauma survivor, right? And
Yeah.
so hearing him cry was like, oh my goodness, yes, thank God. And then having him like, on my chest immediately, and then he latched immediately. I felt so amazing. Like, and I
Mm-hmm.
felt like, oh, this is like my redemptive birth. And like, and
Mm-hmm.
so we had a beautiful breastfeeding journey with him for the first 8 months until I got pregnant again and my
Okay.
milk dried up. And so he ended up having to go on the bottle, but I had amazing months with him. And then my third son, I also had a hospital birth with him. So with both my boys, I ended up with gestational diabetes.
Okay.
I went for the testing and all that kind of stuff. And then I ended up with gestational diabetes requiring insulin. And so that put me at high risk.
Right.
And I'm using quotation marks for those who are just listening to the podcast and can't see. So I ended up being high risk because of the gestational diabetes requiring insulin. And so both times I was instructed told I needed to be induced.
Mm.
So with my boy, my first boy, so my second birth, he also came on his due date. And so I was supposed to call and schedule my induction date the day after.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I go by, and when I talk about due date, I go by last period due date. So that's
Okay.
what I calculated. I never really I don't go by the ultrasound date or
Yeah.
whatever. So for whatever reason, I've always just kind of stuck to that. And
Mm.
so on my last period due date with my son, I also went into labor, and with him, it was a complete opposite. So
Mm-hmm.
at 3 a.m., I woke up and the contractions were hot and heavy. Like I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's go time. So I told my husband, and then my in-laws came to pick up my daughter at the time, and by the time they came to pick her up, I was in full-blown labor. Like
Oh,
I was
wow.
crouching. And I was like, we got to go to the hospital now. So I went into labor at 3 a.m. and my son was born at 7:15 in the morning. So
Oh,
it was
wow.
super quick, super, super quick.
Yeah.
So that's also why I felt like, this is my redemptive birth. So I didn't have the long, grueling pushing. I didn't have like all of
Mm-hmm.
that stuff, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
beautiful birth with him. Wouldn't change a thing, like for what it is in the hospital setting, right? Nurses were amazing. And here's the other cool thing that I discovered during that birth experience was when it came time to push,
Mm-hmm.
I was laying on my back, like most times that you do in the hospital, right? They don't really, kind of, yeah. So anyway, so I was laying on my back, and then I was pushing, and the nurse comes, and she was like, "Oh, like you're pushing the wrong way." And
Mm.
I I'm gonna put my fingers here, so push where my fingers are. And
Mm.
then when I did that, it was a game changer. That's when it was like, oh,
Okay.
then suddenly like I started pushing the right way, right? And like I like more like, because I once again, like I'm coming from like my first experience when no one corrected, how I was pushing. I was just like, I felt this urge, like that urge that you feel like you have to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
And I was pushing in that way, right? Which I
Okay.
hemorrhoids after my first birth because I was pushing that way, right? But once again, these small tweaks weren't really facilitated that first time around. So with this second time, that nurse telling me that, once I started pushing that way, he was out. He was out
Okay.
quickly, right? And
Yeah.
so I really appreciated that she helped me with that, because I probably would have been doing the same thing that I did before, right? And so he came out, beautiful boy, healthy. It was just a really great experience. And so with my third, I ended up being induced with him because I once again had gestational diabetes requiring insulin, and they didn't want me to go further than 38 weeks, which is standard protocol with gestational diabetes. And so I really hoped that he was going to come like, like my son did, the previous one.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't. He was very comfortable in there. And so my
Mm-hmm.
due date came and went, and they were like, okay, we're going to have to induce you. So I went in for the hospital induction that day. And, in terms of the induction, I was scared because I had heard
Yeah.
a lot of like different stories about being induced, and some, leading to C-section, all that kind of stuff. But it was honestly a very peaceful experience. Like I went in that morning around 8 in the morning. They started the drip at like 10 a.m.
Okay.
And I was laying in the bed pretty much and getting up every once in a while to walk around. It was very peaceful. Like it wasn't anything crazy. And then nothing was really progressing. So they come every so often, they like kind of pump it up a little bit more.
So
Um,
they gave you the Pitocin for the
yes,
induction? Okay.
yeah, yeah. So it was like the IV Pitocin.
Okay.
And they kept kind of coming and turning it up more because like, I
Mm,
wasn't progressing as fast as they wanted me to.
yeah.
And by around 4 o'clock, they came and checked me, and they were like, okay, you're about like 7 centimeters right now. Do you want us to break your water so that we can speed things up? And I was like, yep. Like I was just for it. I was like, yep. And so they came and they broke my waters. And then that's when it was go time. So
Mm,
I got up, I went to the bathroom, and then more came gushing out. And then the contractions really, really started. And then it was go time, right? And
mm-hmm.
so
Were
um
they manageable? Because I know I hear from a lot of women the Pitocin contractions are really, really intense and can be very,
they were
very
very
painful.
they were very intense, very painful. But when I go into birth, like especially in that the pushing stage, I go into a zone, right? Where
Mm,
like I close my eyes and I like envision like an ocean, like what like
okay.
and the contractions are the ocean of the waves coming and going. I just like for whatever reason that really helped me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I went into that mode, that zone, right? And I was using laughing gas actually. So that was the only
Okay.
thing I used for pain relief. And it wasn't even pain relief, it was more so to help me with my breathing. And so
Okay.
like every time the contractions would come, instead of like hyperventilating, I would just breathe into the laughing gas and breathe out, and that would really help me to kind of
Mm,
maintain that steady flow. And so once it was time to, yeah, like it just came hot heavy, the contractions were like intense, and then I felt the urge to push. And so
mm,
the crazy thing about, sometimes what happens in the hospital is that like your body is telling you one thing, and then the practitioners are telling you something else. So like in
yeah.
this case, I'm like, oh, like I was like, I started like my grunting started feeling very like they started saying like, oh, your grunting is starting to be more pushy. Like, don't push yet. We gotta check. Like what
Oh,
like
yeah.
and so they come and they tell you not to push when like your body's telling you to push, right? And the nurses come and they check, and they're like, yeah, you're 10 centimeters. Oh yeah, you can go. And so like I start pushing, and then in the back of my mind, there's always that fear, right? Because there's that trauma from the first time where it was like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, like I don't want him to get stuck or whatever, right? And with
Mm-hmm.
this one, we actually didn't know what we were having. So we were like,
Ah,
I
surprise.
yeah, we didn't know because we already had a girl and a boy. So we're like,
Yeah.
oh, whatever ends up happening, ends up happening. So we had no idea what he was going to be. I felt it was going to be a boy,
Mm,
but it wasn't confirmed, right? And so, went to the pushing stage. He comes out finally. And it was just very straightforward. He comes out on my chest. He also cried right away. He also latched right away. It was a really, kind of beautiful moment. And then like because he was my third baby, like
mm-hmm.
the aftercare is a little bit less, right? You go into a room, and the nurses came to check on me one time, just
Mm-hmm.
basically came, checked on me and baby, gave me something for pain, and then kind of left us, right? And so
Okay.
I wanted to go home as soon as possible because we were in a shared room, and the person beside us, baby was very fussy and kept waking up and waking me and my baby up too, and
Okay.
kind of uncomfortable situation. I just wanted to get home as soon as possible. And so go home with both the babies. And by this time, I had the three beautiful babies at home and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And so we knew that we weren't complete. Like we
Yeah.
had that conversation, was like, do we feel that we're complete with our three? And we both knew that we weren't. And so we're like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
we'll try for our fourth, but maybe next year, right? So this is
Okay.
last year.
Can I just quickly ask before we
Okay.
go to this last birth, what in those postpartum, those immediate postpartum times, did you have any excess bleeding or hemorrhaging, or it was
No.
all fine? And did they like preemptively poke you with Pitocin because you had that history of
Yeah.
bleeding with the first? Like, how did that experience go with those two babes?
Yeah, so as soon as the babies were born, I got the Pitocin pokes. Like
You
they didn't
did.
even ask me. They just come
Okay.
and they just give it to you, right? And
Yeah.
so that's why I thought it was standard, right?
Yeah.
I had no idea that that's actually a choice, and
Yeah.
they just come and they just give it to you, right? And
Okay.
so I had the shots after both boys. And so like I said, so I didn't have any sort of excessive hemorrhaging or anything like that, which was
Okay.
really relieving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no real big complications, like it was pretty straightforward. Came home and I had my three beautiful babies pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got pregnant with my fourth, a little bit of an oopsie. And I say that because fourth, but we didn't plan that it was going to be just then, right? But the
Mm,
universe has its own plans. And so I got pregnant again. And for whatever reason, this time, as soon as I took that test, I knew that I wanted things to be different.
mm,
Like I had gone through my first experience, I had done a ton of work around the trauma. I felt I had my redemptive birth with my son, and then I had the induction experience. And for whatever reason, I was like, no, I want things different this time, because those two times, although they were pretty straightforward, although they were beautiful, they weren't my way. They wasn't what
mm,
I genuinely wanted as a birth experience, right? I just kind
mm-hmm.
of had given into it
Yeah.
because of what had happened right the first time. And so right away I was like, okay, I'm gonna do a midwife again this time. I was willing to give another, like, another try to the midwifery care, knowing in the back of my mind that I've already had gestational diabetes twice before, so I know
Mm-hmm.
that that provides some, risks and all that kind of stuff. And so
Mm-hmm.
knowing full well. And my due date with this baby was December 31st. And so I applied to have a midwife at 5 weeks. So it was
Yeah.
very early on. And I didn't hear back. I was like, and here we usually hear back within, they tell you if you haven't heard back by 12 weeks,
Yeah.
basically start looking for another care provider, because that means we don't have somebody for you, right? And so 12 weeks came and went and I didn't hear back from anyone. So I started like calling some clinics, I started like emailing, and everyone was saying that they didn't have any space, right?
Mm,
Because it was December, there's like a lot of care providers that go on holidays, all of that kind of stuff, right?
right.
And so,
Yeah.
and plus there's just always a shortage of midwives here, right? There's just like not enough, there's too much demand and not enough like supply, basically, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so didn't have a midwife till so 12 weeks come and go. And in the meantime, life is busy, right? I'm busy with my three kids, and like, I'm doing all my personal stuff, and and the pregnancy is going, and I start feeling baby and all of that kind of stuff. And I went to go see my family doctor, who gave me an ultrasound requisition. And so we go and I see the baby. I like, in the ultrasound, and this time we did want to know what we were going to have. I was like, no, like we already had the surprise factor, I want to know this again. So um and so around 20 something weeks I started to get kind of concerned, because I was like, okay, like, it's already 20 something, I don't really have an official provider right now.
Yeah.
I like, what am I going to do, right? And I didn't want to go the OB route, even though I knew I had that option. I
Mm-hmm.
just, for whatever reason, just didn't want to. And by this time, I had done a little bit more research into the birthing world, right? And started to get exposure around, just some things that are more so like choice and all of that kind of stuff. Starting to become aware of like these Instagram pages that have like a lot of like information, a lot of resources and all that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing that this was likely going to be our last baby, I just had this like really big desire to really do things my way this time, right? And
Yeah.
and really trusting my body this time, right? And I built enough of a reconnection and healing relationship with myself to really know that, our intuition is powerful, right? And we know, like in our heart of hearts, because I had done a lot of introspection and reflection of all the experiences I had. And I knew that my intuition told me many things, many times. And there were times that I ignored it. And those times that I ignored it was when things went wrong, right? And so
Right.
this time I said, I was committed to like listening, to connecting, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I was 20 something weeks pregnant, didn't have a practitioner. And I was talking to my mom's groups because I have like pockets of mom's groups from my three babies. And I was telling them, like, like I don't have a midwife and all this stuff. And they're like, oh, there's this Facebook group that's for like alternative birth like experiences. Maybe you should post something on there and see what people might say. And so I posted my story on there. I was like, this is my fourth birth. I want to like have things my way, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody on there had said, oh, have you considered free birthing? And I was like,
Mm.
oh, I was like, what's that? Like,
Yeah.
what this was, you know? And so I was like, okay, like DM me. I want to like chat about that or whatever. And so a few people DM me and we started like having conversations about that. And they're like, oh, so free birthing is basically you do it unassisted. You do it without like a medicalized care provider. It's just you and whoever you choose to be there with you. And you do it that way. And I was like, what? I was like blown away by this. I was like, this is an option. And then that sent me down the rabbit hole of like, all the beautiful Instagram pages that are out there that have like that are specifically on free birth, right? And I was like, something inside me bubbled up. It was like this excitement. And I was like, oh, like amazing. Yes, I want to do this. But at the same time, so at this time, I heard about free birthing, and then actually Josie, who's my birth keeper, she actually reached out to me and was like, oh, like I'm a part of this collective and we support women through free birthing and all that kind of stuff. And I had an amazing like Zoom chat with her and everything. We connected really well. And so I was like, okay, so that was on my radar.
Mhm.
And then at the same time that this happened, a midwife actually reached out to me also from my post and was like, actually, I have space for you in my clinic if you're interested. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I met with her. I really liked her vibe and everything like that. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna go the safer way, and I'm
Right.
doing air quotes again, So it was like, so I was 27 weeks at the time, and then I finally was picked up by this midwife, and because she works in a team of two.
Mm.
And right from the start, I was very, I've advocated for myself. So right from the start, I said, like this is my story, this is my journey, this is what has happened, and these are my wishes. Like I want a home birth, regardless of having the gestational diabetes. I know that I've had it twice before, and I know that likely I will have it again.
Mm.
And they were like, yep, we will support you. Yeah, we'll be there and all that kind of stuff. And then sure enough, I go and I get the gestational diabetes testing. I was positive. And then I also required the insulin again. And
Okay.
so once we got to that point, I knew that it was that things were going to start shifting, right? But I still really trusted that they were going to be supportive of my journey and all that kind of stuff. And so when I went there, at one point I had a meeting with the both of them, and they were super excited, and they were like, yeah, we brought your case to our board and we talked about how we can support you, and we're still going to be able to give you your home birth and support you through that. You're going to have to sign a waiver, right?
Mm.
Declining going against medical advice, right? Because
Okay.
best practice is for you to have a hospital birth so that you can be monitored because of the gestational diabetes and all that kind of stuff. Mind you, during this pregnancy, because I knew that I was likely to have the gestational diabetes, I did everything in my power that I could do to support myself. So I went to go see a dietitian.
Mhm.
I was seeing a naturopath. I was going on supplements to help with the blood sugar, all of that kind of stuff. I was watching what I was eating, all of that kind of stuff. And the thing with my test is
Mhm.
that I missed it, like I failed by 1 point. So it was literally
Oh.
over what they like to see. And that's what gave me the diagnosis. And so I knew that it wasn't like I wasn't out of control or anything like that. Like I was obviously being very responsible for
Yeah.
myself and my baby, right? Like I was doing what I could. If I would have known that my sugars were all over the place and that it was all out of control, then it would have been maybe a bit of a different story. But because I knew
Mm.
that I was doing everything in my power to be able to have a healthy and safe rest of my pregnancy and birth
Mm-hmm.
experience, I felt confident, and my intuition was telling me like you're okay, baby's okay, all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so I was feeling very confident that to follow through with my plan, right? And so was my partner. We were both on the same page about it. And so when I went to go see them, they said that they could still support me and all that kind of stuff. And so at 37 weeks, I had an appointment with my midwives, and I had just had an ultrasound. The baby was measuring really well. My placenta was great. My fluid was great, all of that kind of stuff. And they were like, okay, so because of the gestational diabetes, we're still gonna basically encourage you to have the induction, but because it's a home birth, the only option is the castor oil induction.
Oh
And
no.
so she's telling me about this castor oil, and I was asking questions because like obviously I'm curious. I'm like, okay, so like what is that? What do I do? Like, and she's like, oh, it's this drink that you take, and it basically causes you to go into labor. And because this is your fourth birth, oh, it's gonna work like a charm, and it's gonna be like all this and all this stuff. And I was asking more
Mm.
and more questions, like, so what happens if this and like all this stuff. And I could tell that the more questions I asked,
Yeah.
there was this weird shift, like this, I could
Mm-hmm.
sense this weird energy shift when I was asking her these things. And so I left that appointment feeling weird. Like I was
Yeah.
like, oh, like there's something weird here. Sure enough, I get an email the next day, and she was like, oh, like, I know I was supposed to have a home visit with you next visit, but can you come into the clinic instead?
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, I'll come in. And so I came in, and when I sat down, she basically was like, after you left, to be honest, I felt really uncomfortable because the questions that you were asking me, I didn't have full answers for. She's like, because this is new for me. I haven't supported a mom through this specific situation. And, she basically was just telling me that like she wasn't comfortable, right?
Comfortable with you because you're asking about castor oil and like a mom that has declined castor oil, or she wasn't comfortable with you because you have gestational diabetes in
Yeah,
and wanting to have the home birth.
exactly. Like she just,
Uh,
yeah. So it was she, and and I'm glad that she was honest with me, because
yeah.
it would have, I think if she would have like played it off like she was confident and this and that, but yet she wasn't. I think that and as you know, in the birth, like in the birth experience, those energies are very much
Mm-hmm.
they can sabotage, right? When you know that your
Yeah.
provider's not really like, exhibit A, my first birth experience when my provider wasn't fully connected to me and all of that
Mm-hmm.
everything happened, right?
Yeah.
And so, she told me, she's like, we'll still what I suggest is having shared care. She said, like where we will share care with an OB. You'll have it at the hospital. You can still have your water birth. We can still do it there. Like we can still bring a pool there, all of that. And that's not what I wanted. So I broke
Yeah.
down. So I started like sobbing uncontrollably because like, kind of my worst case scenario was happening right then and there, right?
Yeah.
Where she was basically telling me that like, and now I was going to start having to compromise my birth plan, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
not what I wanted. I didn't want this to happen, right? And so, needless to say, I came home and I was devastated. I was
Mm-hmm.
devastated. And like my husband was like, what happened? And I was like crying and I was like telling him what happened. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to free birth. And
Yeah.
he was like, what?
But sorry, can I interject before you go on to this? Because yeah, I'm excited for where this is
Yeah.
going. But like what a blessing and what a kind of betrayal that you went into this meeting standing in your power and like just asking basic questions about what would happen to you and your baby if you took castor oil, which is toxic to the human body. Like on castor oil bottles, it literally says, do not ingest this. Yet medical midwives give this to mothers to quote unquote jumpstart their labor, which they're just getting like a light form of toxemia because it makes you crap your pants and throw up, and like that's terrible for one thing. But it's like So unbelievable that just because you were asking questions about how this would affect you as a woman, how it would affect your baby that's in utero, the next day she comes back and then, like, to me, this sounds like just a big excuse to say, I'm not comfortable with your gestational diabetes. It's like, no, she's not comfortable with you because you're not playing the good girl anymore. And because you are actually standing up to what it is that she's trying to make you do. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like, and that happens so often with so many women, and they get bullied, coerced into then having that hospital birth and then
Yeah,
having all of these more things that they didn't want to happen, and then going through, this traumatic birth experience and postpartum depression and blah blah blah, all of those things that happen just because, like, they're getting forced into doing something they didn't want to do. And like, I know this happens all the time, but just hearing it from you as a mother and like experiencing that, it's like, that's such a bullshit excuse
yeah.
for her to say that she doesn't want to work with you just because you're being a woman and you're being a mother that's trying to protect your child by asking simple questions. Like
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. Yeah. And that's the thing. I went home and I did like research, right? I looked it up and stuff myself.
Mm,
And right away, my intuition was like, no, like
mm,
right away, like, like the pros and cons, the cons far outweighed the pros for me. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, and
mm,
then I started like, thank goodness that there is like all these kind of experiences and resources are starting to come to the surface now, right? And there is a lot of communities out there, especially like on social media, that have a lot of these incredible empowering stories of women doing things their way, right? And having
mm,
autonomy and all that kind of stuff, right? And
mm,
I started like looking
mm,
into this, right? And I was like, why do I have to be induced in the first place?
mm,
Started questioning all of that. Like I was like, baby is like the last ultrasound I went to, he's healthy, he's thriving, everything is looking good. Why can't we just let him be,
yeah,
And I started asking those questions to myself, right? And so anyways, I started really like thinking thoroughly through this, and there was just something that was telling me like, no, like you cannot compromise. You didn't make it this far to get this far.
mm,
And so that's when I made the decision that I was like I was gonna revisit the free birthing
mm,
situation. I was gonna like learn more about it, right? And so I joined a couple Facebook groups. I started like watching videos, all of that kind of stuff, and I started
mm,
researching women who've actually had gestational diabetes. It's to be honest, I didn't find too many experiences
okay,
that of women who have gestational diabetes requiring insulin that had a natural like free birth, all that kind of stuff, right? Mind you that I still had some interventions in my pregnancy, like the ultrasounds, the gestational diabetes. I didn't even know that you can reject to do that test, the sugar
okay,
test where you take all of that stuff, right? This was all new to me that I was like, what? That's a choice? Like I
mm,
have to do all those things, right? But I was like going along with the protocols and all that kind of stuff, right? And and so yeah, so I had that conversation with my husband, and he was like, I'm here to support you with what you want to do. I trust you, and I'm here for you, and and we're gonna do this, right? And
mm,
so I emailed her. I basically emailed them, and I basically discharged myself from their care. And I said, I'm going to go a
mm,
different direction. And she was just like, can I ask why? And I just said, like, I just don't want to compromise with my birth this time around. Like it's just too
yeah,
important to me. And I thank you for everything that you've done up until this point. Like, I don't have anything, like I have no hard feelings against them, to
mm,
be honest. I
mm,
know that they
they're
have to,
bound.
they're bound. Exactly, right? She is doing her job, and that
Mm,
her license at the end of the day is on the line, right? And
mm,
at the end of the day, that's really what comes first. I'm,
yeah.
I'm sorry, but like like that's
Yeah,
really
it's true. The licensure will always come before the mother if you're dealing with a medical midwife or anyone that has that to hold. Like, it will always come first, which
exactly.
is, yeah.
And it is what it is, right? And
Hmm.
so I went back to the amazing birth keeper that I had connected with originally, and I was like, I know that this is short notice.
Hmm.
Like, I'm like, 38 weeks, like, do you have a spot for me? And she's like, I can make a spot for you. So, on went my, like that was the new chapter of like my free birth experience that
Mm,
basically for the next 39, 40, almost 4 weeks was a mental game, right?
mhm,
Because once I went for that last ultrasound and I discharged myself,
mm.
then it was just me and my baby,
Yeah.
and it was, and like I said, like going on the last period date, right? I was like, okay, December 31st, knowing like this is my fourth baby, he's probably gonna come like super quick,
Mhm.
but nope, December 31st came and went, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, and I was like, what is going on here? So basically, I went into labor at 41.6, and so I was almost 42 weeks, and those last 2 weeks were, let me tell you, they were uh, one of the most intense couple of weeks, basically, of my life, because
Mm,
then I really had to dig my heels in with my intuition
mhm,
and with my connection with my baby, right? And so from that point forward, I really started to I had daily, like, basic, every night I would go into the tub and I would, like, have baths, and I would
mm,
meditate with the baby, and I would just connect with him, right? And I was like,
mm,
okay, baby, like, and he was super active, like he was super active baby in there. So I would always feel him moving, and I was just connecting with him. I was like, okay, I'm ready when you're ready, and I
mhm.
would be sobbing and, like, and
Aw.
just like, because at the end of the day, as much as I was trusting in myself, as much as I was in my power, as much as I was like confident, there's still the fear mongering, right, in the back of my mind of like, like, what
Yeah.
if, and all this. But I was like, no, I have to silence those like fears,
Mm,
and it just like really like realign myself, right? And how I did that was by, just deeply connecting with my baby. And so, when the time came and I was like, oh my goodness, like, when is this baby gonna come, right?
mhm.
And like, in hindsight now, when I talk to like people about this, I was like, the only thing I would have changed from that whole experience was telling people the due date, because
Yeah.
as soon as I went past that due date, every single
Mhm,
day there were people that were, well-meaning, but
mhm,
they were checking in, and it's just like, like, oh my goodness, like, you're so late, like, is he okay? Are you okay? Like, when are you going to go to the doctors? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? All this kind of things, right? And I was like, and that like, it almost like it sways you, right?
yeah.
Like, it's almost like the wind coming at you, and you just have to kind of like shield yourself, right?
Mhm.
Because like I was committed, I was like in my zone, but yet there was all these external voices coming and, like, kind of planting little seeds of doubt and stuff, right? And
Yeah.
so
Did you tell anybody except for your husband that you were quitting the midwifery care, or did you just kind of let them believe that you were still with that
yeah,
group?
yeah, pretty much. The funny thing is that our families had no idea. They didn't even
Okay.
know I'm having a midwife, to be honest.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
I wasn't asked about it, and I didn't
Yeah.
tell, because I
Okay. Yeah.
sort of opinions.
Mm,
There were some close friends of mine that knew that knew what I was doing,
mm,
and they were scared. They were just like, like, oh my goodness, you're so brave. Like, why would you do that? Blah, blah, blah. Like, they just not understanding, right? Because
mhm,
the conditioning runs deep in our
mhm,
society, as you know, right?
mhm.
And the thought of a woman taking authority and autonomy over her body is like
Mm,
unheard of,
mm.
right? Like, it's just like, oh my gosh, like, it just so much
Yeah.
fear around it, right? But then, like, the more I saw stories, the more I witnessed like beautiful births on like Instagram and stuff like that, I was like, and the more I heard podcasts like yours, right, of like
Mm,
women standing in their power and doing this, I was like, I can do this, I can
mhm,
do this, right? And so the morning of my 41+6 day came,
mm,
and I woke up around 3 or 4 in the morning, and I had pre-labor for about a week beforehand, where
mm,
they started and I was having contractions, but they weren't consistent,
mm.
and they didn't last. Like, I would have episodes of a few hours where they would be consistent, and then they would stop for
Okay.
days, right? So it was like this big mind game, right? And I was like, oh
Mm.
my gosh, what's happening? But this particular morning came, and I had done everything imaginable to like help encourage baby, right? I did the mile circuit. I was like doing the curb walking, like I was doing like everything, like right, that was like natural. I went for acupuncture, acupressure, all of these kind of things to like kind of facilitate to help, right? And yeah, but at the end of the day, I knew that he was going to come in his own timing. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
when he's ready. Like he can't be in there forever, like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right. But it's still, you do get impatient, right? Like I just wanted to meet him. And besides, I was so uncomfortable. Like I
Mm.
was huge. Like, I was like sleeping sitting up. I was going to the bathroom every 15 minutes overnight. Like it was, those last days are just they're physical and a mental struggle, right? And
Mm.
so especially when you don't have a date in mind, with induction, that they're going to come on this date and all that kind of stuff, right? So this was
Mm.
all just really leaving it to the universe, right? And
Yeah.
so the day came, the contractions started, like they were very regular for several hours, so I knew that this was it, right? And so
Mm.
I messaged my birth keeper and I was like, okay, this is what's happening. And she's like, when do you want me to come? And I was like, like pretty much any time. And I had this envision of like, so I had the birth pool set up and everything like that at my home. And I had this vision that I wanted my kids to be there. And so I had prepared them. I had like
Mm-hmm.
talked to them. I had prepared them. I had told them, like mommy's going to have like the baby. This is how it happens. I had like these like age appropriate books that I had bought that I had like showed them and all that kind of stuff. And I had like this vision that they were going to be there with me, but I went into labor in the morning,
Mm.
and my like most children 5 and under, they were full of energy first thing in the morning. And here I am contracting and walking around my house and they're all like all over the place. I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. So I called my mom and mom came and picked them up and took them. And so so then it was just me, my husband, and my birth keeper. And it was so peaceful. It was so
Mm.
peaceful. I did hypnobirthing. So I had like my earphones in and like my AirPods, and I was listening to like the affirmations and just really getting in that zone as they were coming. Breath was my best friend,
Mm.
breathing through the contractions. And then something told me, okay, it's time to go in the water. So
Okay.
most of it was on the birth ball. And so I went into labor around 6 in the morning, like full on. And then I got into the water probably around 4:30, like in the
Okay.
afternoon point.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I got in the water, then things started picking up. So
Mm-hmm.
like the contractions were very strong, very regular. And I was sitting, because like I know in the birth pools they have, like in mine, there was like a little seat inside.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I sat on that little seat and they were like, the contractions were coming, and then I took the earphones on, then it was just me and like just pretty much like my breath.
Mm-hmm.
And then my birth keeper was like, how about you try switching positions? Like try switching positions, maybe let gravity help you a little bit, maybe try on your hands and knees. And I was like, okay. And I was feeling like I wanted to do that anyways. And so I got onto my hands and knees, and then
Mm.
then it like came hot and heavy. So pretty much I went from like went into transition very, very quickly. And then I started feeling, I was like, okay, this is like, it's go time basically. And I went into this like full on zone.
Mm.
And for whatever reason, I started thinking about, my ancestors. And
Okay.
I have a very deep connection, deep spiritual connection with my grandmother, my maternal grandmother who's
Mm.
passed.
Mm.
And she had 9 kids herself, in a third world country, obviously birthed, like just literally herself,
Mm-hmm.
like no medical care, all of that kind of stuff. My mom had me, my whole birth story is also like crazy,
Mm-hmm.
so I started thinking about the women that came before me, and I just
Mm.
thought about, like how they did it. And I was
Yeah.
like, and for whatever reason, I drew strength from thinking about that. And so when it came time when I knew that I would like transition was happening,
Mm.
I like summoned their help, right? I was like, okay, like, I need you in this moment,
Yeah.
and then I got the feeling like I needed to push, and I was like, oh my goodness, like
Here we go.
here we go. And it's weird because like for an instant, like I got like fearful, right? Because I was like, okay, like I started thinking those ideas of when they check you for the lip and all that kind of stuff, right? But I was like, no, man, like I'm ready, like I'm ready, this baby wants to come, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I roared my first push,
Yeah.
and I felt his head come out. And so like I felt I reached down and I felt and I felt like his head, and it felt like there was like liquid. Like, so I think he was still in the sack a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if my water had fully broken. And so but I knew he was there. So I was like, okay, good. I'm doing good. So I told myself that, like, right. And so the next wave came, the next contraction came, and I pushed another time. And then his full head came, and I felt his face. And I was like, oh my goodness, like there he is. Right. And so then they literally pushed him in 4 pushes, and he was out. So like
Oh, wow.
half his body, and then the last push he fully came out. And in that
Mm.
moment it was so surreal. I
Mm.
just remember, like, first of all, my husband tells me that he's never heard me roar like that before.
Mm-hmm. The primal, yeah, the wild
Very
primal.
primal, very primal, right? And I look down, and then I see him floating in the water with his big beautiful brown eyes, and I'm
Oh.
like, like there he is. And like it was almost like time stands stills, and it stands still in those moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I grabbed him and I picked him up, and I looked at him, and it was just like the most incredible feeling, and I held him, and he didn't cry right away, which I knew was like normal.
Mm-hmm.
But he was very alert. He was looking around and looking at me. And then I held him close to me, and I was rubbing him, and then he cried. And then me and my husband just broke down, right? Because
Oh,
there's just like that trauma experience
yeah.
of doing that, right? And so like, and then it was just this surreal, blissful, incredible moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I held him, and I was like, I can't believe I did it, And it's
Wow.
so beautiful. And then I actually started bleeding quite a bit. And so my birth people was like, you need to get out of the water. And so I got out, and I brought him with me, and I had everything set up here in my living room and everything like that. And I birthed my placenta very quickly, probably within the first, I want to say 15-20 minutes. The placenta came out by itself and everything like that. Baby was still very much attached to the cord and everything like that. He was with me. And yeah, I was bleeding quite a bit, but we
Mm-hmm.
were able to kind of calm it down with some of the tinctures and kind of the homeopathic things that she had in her toolkit. And yeah, and it was just like, just me, my husband, her, my baby, for those first like few hours. And then my mom came, and she brought my daughter. So
Mm.
daughter came, she saw me with the baby, and previously she had told me that she wanted to cut the cord. And
Okay.
so I showed her one of the books and stuff like that, and she's like, what is that? And I explained to her and everything like that, and she's like, I want to cut it. And I was like, are you sure? And she was like, yeah. And so she came, and I have this beautiful picture, and I think I submitted it to you actually, where it was like me, the baby, and her, and I'm just looking at her because it was like this full circle moment, where
Oh,
here's my beautiful first girl that,
yeah.
I had this traumatic experience with her, and then here's my last baby, right, where I had this incredible, beautiful, empowering
Mm-hmm.
birth, and it's just like this full circle healing moment, right? And so after the blood calmed down and everything like that, and then she left, and my mom was there, my husband was there, and it was just peaceful. It was so
Mm.
peaceful, like, he latched and everything like that, and then we fell asleep here. And it was just it was an incredible experience. I would not change anything in it. He was a healthy 9 pounds 13 ounces, so he was
Wow. Yeah.
no tearing or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just I just went with what my body told me,
Yeah.
and what he helped too, like
Mm-hmm.
I like it's a very like it's his very much his experience at the same time as it is mine, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so those were my four very unique,
Wow.
different but very incredible experiences.
Yeah. And what did you do with, because this last baby was the only baby, I'm assuming, that the placenta you actually got to keep and have like sacred moments with. So what did you do with that placenta
Yeah,
after your daughter cut it?
so actually all four of my babies I encapsulated my
Oh,
placentas.
you did?
So
Okay, so you got to keep them even from the
yep.
hospital birth. Oh,
Yes, I did.
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I did encapsulate all four of them. And then with this one, he was attached for about an hour. I want to say about an hour and a half, an hour to an hour and a half,
Mm-hmm.
which was super cool because I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
had that experience before, right?
Mm.
And my daughter comes in, and she's like, I have it in the bowl, and she's like, Mom, what is that? And I tell her, I was
Oh,
like, oh, it's called the placenta, and that's where the baby was attached, and that's how he was eating. And she's like, oh, like just her eyes were so wide, but she's so wise beyond her years. Like I just adore her. Like she's just a
yeah.
very a beautiful, beautiful girl. And
Mm.
she got scared when it came time to like cut it. So that my husband did assist her,
Okay.
and she saw a little bit of blood and she's like, why is it bleeding? And like, we're like, oh, it's
Mm-hmm.
normal. It doesn't hurt the baby. Like, and so my husband had to
Mm-hmm.
like kind of assist her and stuff. So it was a really special moment and
Oh,
really cool to be able to like just be so raw, like
yeah.
undisturbed and like so peaceful and just allowing my body do what it was meant to do, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And yeah, like all four of your stories are so different. And even though your first one was riddled with so much extreme trauma, I know I said I was really excited to hear your beautiful birth stories. And I do still see the beauty in that because it was such a from what I have gathered from hearing that story and then the subsequent baby 2, baby 3, and this really, really amazing story where you totally took your power back. Like there is beauty in all of those experiences that you took,
yeah,
or that you went through, pardon, because you were able to take from them and it was able to give you that power, that confidence, that knowing that
yeah,
for this last baby that you knew this was going to be our last and you wanted it to be different. And even when those medical midwives were trying to coerce you into, we want you to have a hospital birth because it's going to be quote unquote safer for you, where it's like, no, it's just going to be safer for them. You
yeah,
straight up are just like, nope, I'm not going for this. I'm not taking that on. I'm just going to quit them and go with someone that's going to respect my wishes, someone that's going to support me in the way that I want and need it. Not even
exactly.
necessarily need it, the way that I want to be supported. And then you had this amazing, beautiful experience birthing your son. And
Yeah,
yeah, like I just do see all four of those experiences as being beautiful because it got you to who you are now. It got you to the mother that you are to this son. It got you to being able to trust your body, listen to your body, and listen to your baby. And he got to
yeah,
be born in the way that he was wanting to be born as well. And it's
yeah.
just so, yeah, it's so incredible to hear stories like this when the first ones can be so riddled with a lot of deep, deep trauma. And like you said, you had very intense postpartum depression from that. You weren't even able to breastfeed your own child for the first time. And like, yeah, that's so heartbreaking, but it wasn't something that was going to define who you were. It wasn't as if you were going to birth in the hospital for all of your next babies and then just be completely afraid of what was going to happen. You really did change your story and you actively made these choices to get to where you are. And I'm so proud of you. I'm
Well, thank you.
so freaking proud of you for
Thank you.
that. And
I'm proud of myself too.
you should be, you really should be. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so amazing. It's
And it's just, yeah, I feel it's just, I 100% agree with everything that you just said. Like I honor and I treasure all four of my birth experiences, even the birth trauma, like
Mhm,
if it wasn't like like it is what it is. It happened. I
mhm,
can't go back and change it.
mhm,
But I did the best that I could with what
mhm,
I was given.
mhm,
And I chose to step into my power and change the narrative.
mhm.
And like you said, like I leaned into the wisdom of my body and knowing that, my intuition was right on every step of the way
Mhm.
and didn't allow for those like all the voices, all the interventions that can get involved to sway me
Yeah.
because I knew that I would be living in deep regret if I did,
Yeah.
and in this situation, I have no regrets. Like I said, the
Oh,
only regret I have is telling people my due date.
yeah. Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, so he's a very special baby. He's so
Mm,
peaceful, amazing sleeper,
mm.
very intuitive. Like it's just I don't know, it's just a different, very different experience,
Yeah.
and I feel so great this postpartum period. Like, of course, the hormones and all that kind of stuff, but I just feel so trusting,
Mhm,
where it's just like I got this, like, I'm like I'm a lot more calm and
mhm,
patient around, things that maybe before would have gotten me like out of sorts and all that kind of stuff, right? And so
mhm.
it was very healing for me. And I think that it was also generationally healing for me as well, right? That
Yeah.
I did some really deep generational like healing, from for the mothers that came before me, and
Mhm,
then my daughter who one day will be like, hopefully she'll be a mother too,
mm.
and I tell her that all the time, so I can't wait to be able to impart all the wisdom to her and empower her, in
Yeah.
her journey when that time comes.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Oh, yeah. Your stories, they are just really incredible and just goes to show how amazing women are. And like connecting to our power just leads us in the absolute right direction for where we need to be going. And yeah, it's so fantastic. I'm so grateful that we got connected and I'm able to hear your story and I'm able to share your story so that other women can hear this.
Yeah,
Especially as you were saying that when you were looking, you didn't hear many stories of women with diabetes on insulin birthing in this way. So it's like you are now that woman that people will find, that these mothers, new mothers will find and say, oh, okay, she had this, but it doesn't mean that she needs to be induced. It doesn't mean she has to birth in hospital. It doesn't mean she has to give all her power away. She can still be a powerful woman and birth her baby in exactly the way that she wants it to go.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll go back to, what my doula told me, and I will tell this to every woman out there is that please educate yourself, inform yourself, know your choices, because if you don't know your choices, you don't know your options, you don't have any, right?
Yeah.
And in your most vulnerable time, which, when we're birthing, it is very deeply vulnerable, right? Don't know those choices, you're going to be very easily swayed to just go with whatever it is that they come and tell you, right?
Yeah.
That like, we need to do this because of this and all that kind of stuff, right? And so, yeah, it's just really a testament that, we are wise beyond what we know. And, we don't have to allow for, the coercion to happen, right? And the stripping of the autonomy to happen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Abby. Is there anything else that you would like to say about any of your birth experiences, your pregnancy experiences, before we get to how women could contact you?
Yeah, like I said, just exactly what I just, shared, and to know that you're not alone and that you're not a crazy person for wanting to take matters into your own hands, and
Yeah.
that we can absolutely recover from trauma. We can rewrite the narrative. We can take our power back, and just find an incredible, like, yeah, just surround yourself with people that will support you and your vision, and that will, believe in you, just like you yourself. So yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. And if women would like to contact you, hear a bit more deeper into maybe your first birth story, or you mentioned as well after that birth, you are facilitating healing. Is it for trauma birth women
Yes.
that have experienced extreme birth trauma? So if someone wants to contact you about that or just about birthing with diabetes, how can
Yeah.
they get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a women's transformational life coach as well. I'm a speaker, I'm
Okay.
an author as well. I have a website, so it's abigailteixeira.com. I'm most active on Instagram, which is uh.vee, Avi. And there's my emails on there and everything like that. I very much welcome and encourage women to reach out to me. I'd love to talk about all things birth, about my experience, go deeper into like, the gestational diabetes, the options, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's how people can connect with me.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much, Abby. I'm so grateful that I was able to witness you in sharing all of these beautiful stories.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, women, for listening to this latest episode of the Free Birthing in Color movement. If you want to continue supporting this movement and all that comes with it, please give a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Like the videos on YouTube and share this episode with some of your friends. As reciprocity for the work that I'm doing and the content that I'm creating, it only takes 2 minutes to show your support through a 5-star rating, a small written review, and a share. If you want to give a monetary donation to help with the back-end costs of keeping everything that is happening within this movement going, you can send your donations through PayPal via the link in the show notes. And again, as reciprocity for the work that I'm doing and creating, I'm so grateful when those donations come through. I have many other avenues of work that I've created, such as Portals of Wisdom, which are educational guidebooks for women to reclaim and remember their personal bodily sovereignty. I have one-to-one activation sessions and one-to-one or group mentorship opportunities, as well as an amazing course called Cyclical Woman that is a deep dive into the natural cycles of Mother Earth and connecting into your internal rhythms in relation to where Mother Earth is at any given moment. And lastly, I want to mention again the Free Birthing in Color community. It is open for enrollment, so please, if you want to create a deeper sense of connection to myself and other women navigating the same phase of life that you're in, please, please, please come and join us, and let's create something truly beautiful in there. All information can be found within the show notes below, or you can go to primalwomanportal.com and you'll find everything that you need. I'll see you in the next episode.